You didn't fail, and you probably never failed in the way you think you did. What happened was something else, much quieter and harder to notice. You lost the thread, and when the thread is lost, everything feels like failure, even when it isn't. The feeling is the same. The guilt is the same. The internal narrative too. But the cause is different. And while you try to fix the wrong problem, you stay trapped in the same cycle. You might recognize yourself here. You start something with real intention. It's not impulse. It's not empty excitement. You organize, plan, make space in your routine. At first it works. You show up. You maintain it. You feel progress. And that creates identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who does things. Someone who follows through. Someone you can trust. And then at some point something slips. Not everything. Not all at once. A delay, a bad day, a confusing week, a tiredness you didn't plan for. Nothing big enough to call failure. And precisely because of that, you don't react. This is where most people start to lose their way. Not because they quit, but because they didn't notice the thread beginning to loosen. You think it's fine, that it's just a pause, that you'll be back tomorrow, that you've already proven you can do it. So there's no need to worry. The problem is that the brain doesn't operate based on what you proved in the past. It operates based on what you do now. And when the present turns into absence, even temporarily, something begins to change. You didn't fail on the day you stopped. You failed on the day you kept no contact. No minimal gesture. No symbolic presence. Because the thread doesn't break with a big decision. It breaks with accumulated small silences. Each day you don't show up doesn't seem serious. But each day you don't show up weakens continuity. And continuity is what sustains anything in the long run. Most people call this a lack of discipline, or motivation, or focus. But if you look honestly, you'll see that it wasn't that. You didn't stop because you no longer cared. You stopped because you lost the thread and didn't notice the exact moment it happened. And when you do notice, the weight is already there, the feeling that coming back now requires more energy than you have available. The brain is simple in this way. It doesn't interpret intention. It interprets patterns. If you show up every day, even a little, it records, "This is part of who I am." If you disappear for days or weeks, even with good reasons, it records something else. This isn't stable. This depends on conditions. And everything that depends on conditions starts to lose space in your identity. You stop being someone who does and become someone who used to. The climax of this process isn't the moment you stop. It's the moment you try to return, not on the first day, but after some time has passed. The idea of coming back carries a strange weight. It's not just laziness. It's pressure. The feeling that now it would have to be done the right way, better than before. More organized, more consistent, because you already know how it works. And that have-to paralyzes you, not because you can't do it, but because the thread is no longer there to pull you back naturally. You start to wonder what's wrong with you, why you always start and don't finish, why you lose momentum, why progress always seems temporary. And that narrative is unfair, because you didn't lose capability, you lost continuity. And those are very different things. Capability can be recovered with effort. Continuity is recovered with minimal presence. But no one taught you that. The mistake is thinking that coming back requires the same effort as starting. It doesn't. It requires something else. It requires finding the thread again. And the thread isn't found through intensity. It's found through contact, through a gesture too small to feel significant, too small to generate pride, but big enough to keep the relationship with what matters alive. When you understand this, something changes. You stop treating bad days as days of failure and start treating them as days of maintenance. The goal isn't to move forward. It's not to disappear, not to drop to zero. Read one page, open the file, think for 2 minutes, write down an idea. These gestures feel irrelevant when you're obsessed with progress, but they are what keep the thread tight enough not to break. Most people fail because they build only one version of themselves. The ideal version, the focused, organized, productive version. And when that version doesn't show up, nothing remains. Those who learn not to fail build 2 versions, one for good days and another, minimal, almost ridiculous, for bad days. This second version isn't meant to move forward. It's meant to keep you from disappearing. And that is far more powerful than it seems. Over time, this minimal presence changes your identity. You stop being someone who depends on the right mood and become someone who adapts to the mood. The brain records this. And once it does, doing more no longer feels heavy. Because you never fully left. You don't need to convince yourself. You don't need to negotiate. You just continue. Few people talk about this because it isn't an exciting idea. It doesn't look like transformation. It doesn't create emotional highs. But this is what separates those who keep going from those who are always restarting. It isn't strength. It isn't talent. It isn't discipline in the classic sense. It's the ability to keep the thread even when everything tells you to disappear. If you look at your life right now, there's probably something you call a failure that was, in truth, just a lost thread. A habit, a project, a form of self-care. Something that didn't die but drifted away. The good news is that threads don't need to be rebuilt from scratch. They can be found again with a small gesture today. Not tomorrow. Not when everything improves. Today. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think failed, but might have just lost the thread? Write it in the comments. Naming it changes the relationship. If this video resonated with you, leave a like. It helps this content reach more people who are blaming themselves unnecessarily. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now. Not as a big promise, but as a small gesture of continuity. Because in the end, it's not about never making mistakes. It's about never losing the thread without realizing it.